Hello and welcome to another Bard's Tale. This week we will continue with the tale of Thor. Last we heard, Thor had battled Hlungnir on the fields of Griatunagada, and though he had won, he came away with half a large whetstone lodged in his head. Thor did eventually recover, and sometime after he was visited by Loki, who proposed they visit the court of Geirrod, the Jotun. Thor accepted, expecting it to be quite the adventure, and not suspecting Loki of anything. Though there was always something to suspect with the trickster god, and this was certainly no exception. Loki had been missing for 3 months, and had not told anyone why. The reason for his absence was that he was trapped in a chest, and almost starved to death by the Jotun Geirrod, who had captured him flying through the wood in the form of a falcon. Loki was only released under the condition he convinced Thor to come to Geirrod's domain, and it seems Loki succeeded. Better yet, Thor left behind Mjolnir, Megingjorth, and Jarngleipa. On their travels, they spent the night in the home of a kind giantess named Grid, and Grid knew of Geirrod's plan. When she could separate Loki from Thor, she managed to whisper in secret that Geirrod planned to kill Thor. She gave Thor her unbreakable magic staff, and her own mighty belt and iron gauntlets. The next day, Thor and Loki traveled onwards, until they came to the river Vimir. When they began to cross the river, with Loki hanging from Thor's belt, they noticed the water was rising. Looking upstream, Thor saw the culprit, a giantess named Gialp, daughter of Geirrod. Thor lifted a hefty stone, and threw it at Gialp. This stemmed the flow of the river, and Thor managed to pull himself and Loki from the river by a rowan bush. Not long after they reached Geirrod's court, they were escorted to a chamber with only a single chair, which Thor decided to sit in. Suddenly the chair lurched and began to rise quickly to the ceiling. Thor knew he would be crushed to death, so quickly drew Grid's staff. It struck the ceiling and the rafters splintered, but Thor was free of harm. But at that same moment, he heard 2 loud cracks. He looked below him to see that Gialp and Gleip, the 2 daughters of Geirrod, writhing on the floor, their backs broken. Geirrod entered the chamber and pulled a glowing molten iron from the flames of a fireplace with tongs. The giant threw the molten shard at Thor with all his strength, but Thor caught it with the iron gloves that Grid had given him. Geirrod, now terrified, hid behind one of the iron pillars which lined the room. Thor drew back his arm and threw the molten iron back at Geirrod with force, and the molten iron pierced through the pillar, exiting through Geirrod's chest, killing the giant. Many of Thor's tales revolve around giants, as they interfere with the daily goings of people and Aesir, attacking, stealing, and sometimes proposing marriage. This was certainly the case when one day Thor awoke to find Mjolnir missing. Someone had stolen the dwarf-forged warhammer, and Thor was furious. Thor asked Loki for help, and Loki, with the aid of Freya's feather cloak, took the form of a falcon and flew away. He flew across many lands till he came to Jotunheim, where he discovered that Mjolnir was stolen by a Jotun named Thrym. The Jotun was a fearsome leader of the frost giants, and when Loki inquired about the stolen hammer, Thrym stated he would only return the hammer if the Aesir would give Freya to him as a bride. Loki returned to Asgard, and Freya, the promiscuous goddess who had lain with god, elf, dwarf, and human, of all people, was furious at Thrym's demands. This brought things to a standstill, until Heimdall had a wonderful idea. Why not give to Thrym Thor as a bride? It sounded absurd, but Thor, angered as he was, reluctantly agreed, for how could the thunder god be a thunder god without his lightning hammer? To deceive Thrym, they dressed Thor in a bridal veil, and had him wear Brisingamen, a magical necklace belonging to Freya, which disguised him. Loki agreed to accompany the bride Thor to Jotunheim, and give him to Thrym. And so they travelled to Jotunheim and the realm of Thrym. Loki and the bride-to-be were welcomed to the kingdom, with a large feast honouring Freya. During the feast, the bride ate 8 salmons, downed 3 large tankards of mead, and consumed an ox whole. The giants were, needless to say, astonished. Thrym demanded an explanation as to how the beautiful and slim-figured Freya could eat and drink as much as a giant. Loki, the cunning bridesmaid, quickly explained that the bride was so excited to be wed to the king of giants that she had not eaten in 8 days. Thrym accepted this, and when the feast calmed down, he went to kiss his bride. Lifting the veil, he was confronted with a glare so furious even he, so-called king of giants, was taken aback. Once again the bridesmaid Loki stepped in and explained that the bride was so eager to be wed to the king of giants that she had not slept in 8 nights. Suddenly Thrym's sister interjected and demanded a gold ring of Freya if she so wished to marry her brother. The bride agreed, but only if Thrym would place Mjolnir on her lap. Thrym ordered the giants to fetch Mjolnir, but no sooner had the hammer been placed on the bride's lap when a whirling rage of thunder and metal tore through the hall as Thor released his fury in a murderous rampage, slaying every giant in the room, till only Loki stood amongst the savage and beaten bodies of many Jotuns. Silently, the two Aesir made their way back to Asgard. This was not the last time Thor would attend a great feast, nor would it be the last time he would attend a great feast with a Jotun. Aegir, a sea Jotun, and a most gracious host, organized a great feast for the Aesir. A magnificent affair held in a beautiful hall beneath the sea. All was prepared for the coming of the gods, but Aegir worried that he would not have enough ale to invite everyone. Tyr suggested that they go to his father, the giant Hymir, for his father had a magic cauldron which brewed unlimited ale. Tyr, with Thor as well, travelled to his father to fetch the magic cauldron. But it would not be so simple as asking. Thor was unable to keep his anger in check, and a series of arguments and tests between Thor and Hymir arose, and they decided to set out to sea to test their strength. They reached the ocean's shores, but before they set out in a small boat by the shore, Thor killed the largest ox in Hymir's herd. Thor mounted the head on a large hook and put the hook on a large rope. They kicked off shore and traveled out to sea. The land was left far behind till only the ocean could be seen, and here Thor and Hymir began to fish, throwing their bait into the sea. Hymir received no bites, but whatever bit onto Thor's bait rocked the boat violently. Thor pulled and tugged with all the might he could on the rope, but whatever was at its end in the depths of the sea was massive, and even the mighty thunder god struggled. But he was Thor, and finally the beast at the end of the rope was cast clear of the ocean's surface. Not all of it, however, as the rest of its body continued downward into the ocean. The gargantuan head of the world serpent Jormungand rose before the boat, dwarfing the Aesir and the Jotun. Thor stood fearlessly before the Titan, but Hymir was terrified, and before Thor could attack the beast as he surely would, the Jotun cut the rope. Thor was only able to strike the serpent with one mighty blow before it descended into the sea below. Hymir and Thor would only return home with 2 whales. Though Hymir knew of Thor's strength, now he issued him one final test. All Thor would have to do was to break a crystal goblet. Thor picked up the goblet and threw it at a stone column, but shockingly, the goblet did not break. Thor was puzzled. It was crystal, was it not? A beautiful woman went over to Thor and whispered him some advice. Thor nodded, picked up the goblet, and threw it hard as before at Hymir's forehead, and there it shattered. Hymir was furious, but conceded that Thor did indeed complete the challenge, and so the cauldron belonged to him. The cauldron was so heavy that Tyr could not even lift it. Thor, however, simply lifted it and carried it on top of his head. Seeing Thor walk off with his prized cauldron infuriated Hymir, and he, along with a group of murderous Jotuns, set off after them to kill Thor and retrieve the cauldron. The 2 Aesir were chased through the forest by the band of Jotuns, till Thor realized they would have no choice but to face them. He lifted Mjolnir and launched himself at the Jotuns. Not a single giant survived the Thunder God's onslaught. Tyr and Thor traveled back to the hall of Aegir, triumphant with the cauldron. That day the Aesir had a great feast. Thor and Tyr may not have escaped Hymir, had it not been for the thunder-calling warhammer Mjolnir. So how did Thor come across such a powerful weapon? This tale begins not in a forge or deep in an ancient cavern, but rather in the bedroom of Sif, Thor's wife. Sif was a lovely Aesir, known for her long and beautiful golden hair, and it was a point she took much pride in. So imagine Thor's surprise when one morning he finds her weeping, and entirely bald, her golden hair now completely gone. Who had done this to the lovely Sif? Who could have caused such cruel mischief? Mischief indeed, for it was the realm of one of the Aesir, who greatly delighted in causing harm to others. This particular Aesir had taken everything into account when he cut off Sif's hair the night before while she slept. Everything, that is, except the unknown depths of Thor's anger. Loki had made a terrible mistake. Thor caught Loki and threatened to break every bone in his body. Loki squirmed and promised to replace Sif's beautiful hair with hair of real gold. Thor dropped him to the ground and left, leaving unsaid what Loki suspected was not a pleasant experience for him should he fail. Loki sought out the aid of the master dwarven craftsmen, known as the Sons of Ivaldi. He commissioned them to make a wig of finely spun gold. Weaved into the gold was a magic which would make it grow naturally, as if of real hair. The dwarves continued to make 2 other gifts for the Aesir. They crafted a long spear made of indestructible material, which they named Gungnir, and this gift they granted to Odin. The 3rd gift was a magical ship called Skidblanir, which they gave to Freyr. The ship's magic made it collapsible, and it could be folded so small it could fit in Freyr's pocket. Loki was tasked with bringing the 3 gifts back to Asgard. On his journey he met 2 other dwarves, named Brock and Ati. They were curious about the gifts Loki carried, and Loki laughed, claiming the 2 dwarves could never craft anything so fine as the gifts crafted by the Sons of Ivaldi. Loki was so confident he made a wager on his head that he was right. The 2 dwarves took the wager and returned to their forges. First, Adi placed a pig's hide in the forge, and had his brother work the bellows until he completed his work. Now, at this time, Loki realized he may have made a terrible mistake, and so took the shape of a fly and flew to the forge of Brock and Ati. As the 2 brothers were working, the fly Loki tried to distract Brock from the bellows by biting into his left arm. But to Loki's dismay, the committed dwarf ignored him and continued to pump the bellows. From the pig's hide atop the forge sprouted bristles of gold, and the pig's hide leapt up and became a wild boar, very much alive. This boar was known as Gullinbursti. It could run faster than any horse, across the sky, or even across water, and its golden bristles glowed so bright in the dark that not even the darkest night could drown their light. As the 2 brothers worked on the 2nd gift, the fly landed on Brock's neck and bit even harder than before, but once again Brock ignored it. From the forge, Ati made a golden ring they named Draupnir. It had a magical ability to make 8 rings of the same size every 9th night. On the 3rd item, the fly now landed between Brock's eyes and nibbled at one of his eyelids. Though Brock ignored the bite, blood began to flow from the wound and dripped into his eye. Brock quickly rubbed the blood away and swatted the fly, but too late, for as Ati drew the final gift from the forge, Ati accused Brock of almost ruining the work. Ati had placed a large piece of iron in the forge, and now he held in his hands a hammer they named Mjolnir. Its only flaw was that the handle was quite short. Mjolnir was powerful. If it were ever thrown, it would return to its owner's hands after striking its target, and it would never miss. Mjolnir was the strongest weapon in the world. Ati sent Brock to Asgard with the gifts they had forged, and Brock arrived with Loki before the Aesir with Gullinbursti, Draupnir, and Mjolnir. Odin, Thor, and Freyr would judge over these gifts, and decide which was the best of them all. Loki stepped forward first, giving Sif the hair spun of true gold. hoping to appease Thor's anger. Loki also gave the collapsible ship Skidbladnir to Freyr, and the indestructible spear Gungnir to Odin. Brock gave the boar Gullinbursti to Freyr, the gold ring Draupnir to Odin, and finally the magical hammer Mjolnir to Thor. The three judges found that Mjolnir was the best gift, for of all the gifts, it would be the greatest for battling the Jotuns come Ragnarok. To his dismay, Loki lost the wager, and so he attempted to flee, but he was quickly and once again caught by Thor. Brock told Odin of the wager, but Odin decided that taking his head was too great a punishment for this foolish wager. So Brock decided upon a different payment, and sealed Loki's mouth shut with wire. This is the tale of how Thor came to wield Mjolnir, but it is also a tale we see repeat itself time and time again. Loki will get himself into a troublesome conundrum, come close to meeting his demise, but then be rescued by the Aesir, only to go and make some other terrible mistake. Loki is the god of mischief in Norse mythology, and often comes across as a fun-loving ne'er-do-well who never truly means harm. But occasionally he does do harm, and sometimes from a very purposeful place. In fact, no greater harm has he caused than that which began the catastrophic beginning of Ragnarok. You know now that the end will be triggered by the death of Odin's son Balder. But what caused his death? Who killed Balder? And it is here that we learn of a darker side to Loki's mischief. For you see, Balder was not slain by Jotun, or Vanir, or giant serpent, or great eagle, or wolf. No. Balder was slain by Loki.